The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white, my name handwritten across the front, no return address. Inside, a rusted key, GPS coordinates scrawled on yellowed paper, and 3 words that made my stomach clench. Time to remember. 15 years in homicide teaches you to trust your instincts, and mine were screaming. This wasn't just another tip. I should have logged it as evidence, followed protocol, called for backup at the very least. Instead, I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket and told my partner, Diane, that I needed a personal day. When I ran the coordinates through our system, my hands went cold. They pointed to a remote area in the Black Ridge Mountains, just 3 miles from where 8-year-old Emily Winters disappeared in 1985. One of those cases that haunts a department for decades. I'd studied it during my academy days, the search parties that found nothing, the parents who never recovered, the rumors of a mountain man that faded into local legend. The drive took 90 minutes, my thoughts drifting as the city gave way to dense forest. Strange fragments surfaced, a sense of pine and something medicinal, the sensation of rough wool against my skin, a deep sense of dread I couldn't place. Stress, I told myself. Nothing but stress from too many crime scenes and too little sleep. I almost missed the turnoff. A narrow dirt path barely visible from the main road. No tire tracks, no signs of recent use. My service weapon felt reassuring against my ribs as I navigated the final mile on foot. The path was too overgrown for my sedan. When the cabin appeared between the trees, something in my chest shifted, recognition without reason. Single story, wooden, with a small covered porch. Not dilapidated, but not recently used either. Preserved, like a museum exhibit. The key slid into the lock with a perfect, terrible click. Inside smelled of cedar and thyme, clean but undisturbed. A wood stove, a simple table, preserved food in mason jars along open shelving. Nothing remarkable except for the door at the back, secured with a padlock that matched the key's weathered brass. My training told me to document everything, to call this in, but something deeper pushed me forward. The padlock opened with the same awful inevitability. The small back room contained just one thing, a wall covered in Polaroid photographs, arranged in neat chronological rows. Each showed a child, aged 4 to 10, with a date written in precise handwriting beneath. I recognized faces from case files spanning 50 years, Emily Winters among them, along with 12 others reported missing between 1972 and 2020. Some cases I'd worked personally, others I'd only heard about. All of them cold. Below the photos, a wooden filing cabinet contained meticulous journals filled with locations, methods, and twisted justifications. The writer described borrowing the children, studying them, then returning most of them, sometimes to their families, sometimes to better homes. My hands trembled as I photographed each page with my phone, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what I'd found. A hidden serial abductor, dozens of victims, and a journal entry from 2 months ago. Time is running out. Soon, they'll all know. The last photograph on the wall stopped my breath. A boy, about 5 years old, with dark hair and frightened eyes. A distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark visible on his neck, identical to mine. The date beneath it, August 17th, 1982. Birthday. I carefully removed the photo, my fingers numb. When I turned it over, shaky handwriting covered the back. I took you, but I put you back. The room tilted as I frantically searched the files for more information. In a folder labeled 1982, I found newspaper clippings about 5-year-old Michael Carr, who disappeared while camping with his parents in the Black Ridge Mountains. The article mentioned the distinctive birthmark, and that the boy was never found. Another clipping, dated 3 months later, reported that the parents were still searching, refusing to give up hope. My name is Michael Reeves, not Michael Carr. I grew up in Springfield with Don and Ellen Reeves, 40 miles from here. I have a birth certificate, school records, a history, but as I stared at the photograph, memories began to surface, being carried through the woods at night, the cabin, an older man with gentle hands and cold eyes, the smell of pine and antiseptic, then different people, a different house, being told to forget, to be a good boy, to answer to a new name. I was that missing child. The parents who raised me weren't my biological parents. I was abducted and, for some reason, returned. Not to my real family, but to strangers who became my family. And the abductor was never caught because no one was looking for him anymore. They thought I was simply gone. I don't know how long I stood there, my reality disintegrating around me. Minutes, maybe hours. But I registered the sound instantly. Footsteps on the cabin porch. The front door opened before I could draw my weapon. An elderly man stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane, his body thin and bent, but his eyes sharp. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Detective Reeves," he said, "or should I say Michael Carr, you turned out well, better than you would have with them." Raymond Blackwood, his name was in the files. He smiled sadly. "I had to make sure you found it. I had to see if you'd remember." I leveled my gun. "You're under arrest." "For what? For telling the truth." He took a slow step forward. "You always wondered why you never felt like you belonged, didn't you? Now you know. But the question is, what will you do with it?" He told me everything. The social work, the selective abductions, the 3 children buried behind the cabin because they were too damaged, and finally, the blue folder in the bottom drawer. Inside, I found proof that my parents never stopped looking, that I had a sister, Sarah, born 2 years after I vanished. They never left their home, hoping I'd return. Raymond took one last look at me before I led him outside. "We all become the monsters we fight, Detective. Remember that." Forensic teams confirmed everything. The photographs, the journals, the graves. 3 weeks later, I stood outside my biological parents' house, my badge heavy in my pocket. A woman in her 70s answered, her eyes the same deep brown as mine. "Mrs. Carr?" My voice cracked. "My name is Michael. I was born Michael Carr. I think I'm your son." Her hand flew to her mouth. Behind her, a man clutched a framed photo of a little boy with dark hair and a crescent birthmark. "We never stopped looking," he whispered. "Not for one day." But the case wasn't over. In my adoptive father's study, hidden behind a false bottom drawer, I found letters spanning decades. Correspondence with Raymond Blackwood. They had known all along. I sit now between 2 families, one bound by blood, the other by lies. The case is closed, but the investigation of who I am has only just begun. The box had been sitting in evidence storage for 15 years. Cardboard edges soft with age. The word Riverside scrawled across it in faded black marker. 5 victims, all women. All posed the same way after death, right hand over their heart like they were making a pledge. The case went cold when the killings abruptly stopped in 2009. No suspect. No closure for the families. Just another dusty box in a room full of unsolved tragedies. Until the DNA hit came through yesterday. "You sure you want to take this on, Carter?" Captain Barnes leaned against my desk, coffee mug in hand. Reopening old wounds can be messy. The original detective, retired last month, I know. I flipped through the case file, studying crime scene photos I'd already committed to memory. Detective Collins worked this case for 3 years after it went cold. If there was anything to find, he would have found it. Barnes nodded. Collins was one of the best. He mentored you for a reason. He tapped the DNA report. Still, this is the first real lead in over a decade. The partial match to Williams might actually go somewhere. Marcus Williams, a small-time drug dealer arrested last week whose DNA shared enough markers with evidence from the Riverside murders to suggest a relative was our killer. Not a direct match, but enough to make the cold case team sit up straight. "I'll handle it," I said, more confidently than I felt. The captain smiled. "Talk to Collins. He's retired, not dead. Might remember details that never made it into the reports." I already had the meeting set up. Michael Collins had been my mentor since I joined Homicide 8 years ago. He'd taught me everything I knew about working a scene, interviewing witnesses, tracking killers. If anyone could help me navigate this case, it was him. His home was exactly what you'd expect from a decorated detective. Orderly, minimal, with framed commendations lining the hallway. He greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a study that could have been transplanted directly from the precinct. "The Riverside killings," he said, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey into tumblers. "Thought I'd take those to my grave." We got a familial DNA hit. I accepted the glass, but didn't drink. "Marcus Williams, arrested for distribution last week. Computer says he's related to our doer." Williams. Collins swirled his whiskey. "Name doesn't ring any bells." He would have been a teenager when the killing stopped. We're looking at his father, uncles, older brothers. Collins nodded slowly. Smart approach. The Riverside killer knew what he was doing. Careful. Methodical. Had to be someone with experience. He took a long sip. "What's your next move?" "Interviews with Williams' family. Fresh canvas of the old neighborhoods, and," I hesitated, "I want to revisit the victimology. Something doesn't add up in the original profile." Collins raised an eyebrow. The profile was solid. 5 women, all brunettes in their 30s, all taken on Friday nights, all found posed the same way. But their backgrounds were all over the map. A nurse, a law student, a barista, a real estate agent, and a stay-at-home mom. Different social circles, different parts of town. The only real connection was physical appearance and the way they were posed. Sometimes that's enough for these psychos. Collins shrugged. "What are you thinking?" "I'm not sure yet, just a feeling." He smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "Always trust those feelings, Carter. They've made you the detective you are." He raised a glass. "To catching the bastard who got away." 3 days and 24 interviews later, I was no closer to identifying our suspect. The Williams family tree had branches extending in every direction, but none led to someone with opportunity and access 15 years ago. Then, a new body was found. She was discovered in Reynolds Park, right hand placed over her heart. Brunette, mid-30s. The press hadn't been briefed about the signature pose from the original killings. That detail had been held back. Only the killer would know to position her that way. "Could be a copycat," Barnes suggested at the scene. The Riverside murders were big news back then. "The hand placement was never released to the public," I reminded him, studying the victim's face. She looked peaceful, almost like she was sleeping. Only the killer would know that detail. A suspect emerged, one of Marcus Williams's cousins, a man with a record of violent offenses. His alibi checked out, but it was too neat, too rehearsed. I pushed harder, certain he was hiding something, but after a week of digging, I was forced to let him go. The red herring had worked. I was looking in the wrong direction. Then Collins called me. "I've been going through some old notes I kept at home," he said. "There was a witness we interviewed back in 2009, right before the killing stopped. Woman named Clara Mendez. Claimed she saw someone fitting our profile near one of the abduction sites. I tracked down Clara, who provided a chilling description of a distinguished man with silver at his temples watching a victim before approaching her. Hours later, I sat at my dining room table, staring at old department photos, and then my world tilted sideways. Collins. The realization came slowly, like watching a puzzle assemble itself in real time. He had been there through every dead end, every misstep, every frustration. He had guided my instincts not to solve the case, but to keep me looking the other way. I arranged for surveillance, dug through old personnel files. What I found made my blood run cold. His career relocations lined up with unsolved murders of brunette women across multiple states. And the final victims, they weren't random. They all had something in common with me. The final piece came when we searched his home. The leather-bound journal, the meticulous details, and the photos of me. When he came home, I was waiting. "You were always my best student," he said, setting his groceries down. "I knew you'd be the one to figure it out eventually. You wanted me to catch you. I'm dying, Carter. Terminal illness. 6 months, maybe less. I couldn't let just anyone close my case. It had to be you." As officers took him away, his eyes never left mine. Even in defeat, he was teaching me. One final lesson from mentor to protege. Weeks later, a text from an unknown number. "Check your desk drawer. I left something for you." Inside, a Polaroid of a woman, peaceful in death, right hand over her heart, and scrawled on the back, "For my finest student, there's always one more lesson." The woman was alive last week. I'd seen her walking her dog near my building. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. Nobody wants the night shift in Raven County, especially not rookies. The veterans call it paying your dues, but there's more to it than that. Something about those empty highways cutting through miles of dense forest, the radio static stretching into silence, the way your headlights catch pairs of eyes watching from the tree line. After 3 months, I was still the newest deputy in the department, which meant I drew the short straw every rotation. Midnight to 8 a.m., patrolling the same 50-mile stretch of county roads where nothing ever happened. Most nights, I'd stop at the same 24-hour diner off Route 16, drink enough coffee to stay alert, and count the hours until dawn. That changed on a Wednesday in late October. I was parked at my usual spot overlooking Miller's Creek when dispatch crackled to life. "We've got another missing person report. Male, 37, last seen at the Lakeside Motel on Route 16. The third disappearance in 6 weeks, all men, all last seen somewhere along my patrol route. The sheriff's department hadn't connected them officially. One was a trucker passing through, another a businessman on a fishing trip, and now this guy. Different backgrounds, different reasons for being in Raven County, but the same stretch of road. My stretch of road." "Rogers, you copy that?" Dispatch sounded tired. "Copy, Ellen. Details? James Walker. Wife reported him missing when he didn't check in last night. He's a pharmaceutical rep, supposed to be meeting with the clinic in the morning. Car's still at the motel. Room looks slept in, but no sign of him." I scribbled the information in my notepad. "Anyone check the traffic cams?" Ellen sighed. "What traffic cams? This is Raven County, not Los Angeles. Sheriff wants you to swing by the motel, see if anything looks suspicious." The Lakeside Motel hadn't seen better days. It had only seen worse ones. Paint peeling, neon sign flickering, exactly one car in the parking lot. The night manager was a skinny kid barely out of high school who looked annoyed at having his phone time interrupted. "Yeah, I remember him. Checked in yesterday around 4, didn't see him leave." He shrugged without looking up from his screen. "People come and go, not my job to babysit them." Security cameras? Owner keeps saying he'll install them, never does. I checked the room myself, though deputies from the day shift had already been through it. Suitcase still there. Toiletries in the bathroom. Laptop on the desk. Car keys on the nightstand. No signs of struggle. Just another man who walked out and didn't come back. Back in my cruiser, I pulled out a county map and marked the locations. The Lakeside Motel, the truck stop where the trucker disappeared, and the fishing cabin where the businessman was last seen. They formed a rough triangle, with the center being a particularly remote stretch of Old Mill Road, a former logging route that cut through the densest part of the county forest. I decided to take a detour down Old Mill Road on my way back to my patrol route. The road was barely maintained, potholes threatening my suspension with every turn. My headlights cut through a tunnel of trees, branches reaching overhead like gnarled fingers. 2 miles in, my radio started to lose signal, static cutting in and out between dispatch messages. I was about to turn around when something caught my eye, a flash of reflective material in the brush about 50 yards ahead. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight, and approached cautiously. The beam revealed a piece of torn clothing snagged on a branch, the reflective strip similar to what you'd see on a jogger's jacket. Below it, barely visible in the undergrowth, was a worn path leading deeper into the woods. Protocol said I should call it in and wait for backup, but my radio was cutting out, and this was the first potential lead in any of the disappearances. I radioed my position as best I could and followed the path, hand resting on my holstered weapon. The trail continued for almost half a mile before opening into a small clearing. What I saw there made my blood run cold. A battered blue pickup truck concealed under a camouflage tarp that had partially slid off. The truck bed was covered, but through a gap in the shell I could see something that looked like camping equipment. I approached cautiously, drawing my weapon. The truck was empty, but as I peered through the windows I spotted something on the passenger seat, a wallet. I tried the door, unlocked. The wallet belonged to Daniel Fletcher, the missing trucker. I immediately backed away, radioing for backup with increasing urgency despite the static. As I retreated toward my cruiser, my flashlight beam swept across something metallic at the edge of the clearing. A small entrance to what looked like an old storm cellar, its doors secured with a heavy padlock. Before I could investigate further, my radio suddenly cleared. Officer in distress. Repeat, officer in distress. Deputy Malone needs immediate backup on Old Sawmill Road, mile marker 23. My heart jumped into my throat. Old Sawmill Road was on the opposite side of the county from me, but I knew Mark Malone, a veteran deputy close to retirement. His voice sounded strained, desperate. All units be advised. Deputy Malone requesting urgent backup. Reports possible suspect in missing persons cases. I took one last look at the storm cellar before running back to my cruiser. The potential evidence would have to wait. An officer in trouble took priority. I radioed that I was responding and peeled away from Old Mill Road, lights flashing. It would take me at least 20 minutes to reach Malone's location, even pushing well above the speed limit on the empty county roads. Old Sawmill Road was even more isolated than my usual patrol route, cutting through a defunct logging operation that had shut down a decade ago. As I approached mile marker 23, I cut my siren but kept the lights flashing. The road opened to a small clearing where the old sawmill entrance used to be. And there, in the center of the clearing, was a county sheriff's cruiser, driver's door open, overhead lights still on, but no sign of Deputy Malone. Dispatch, I'm at Malone's location. No visual on the deputy. Send additional units. Static answered me. I approached the abandoned cruiser cautiously, weapon drawn. The radio inside was still on, occasional bursts of static breaking the silence. The seat was empty, but something was wrong. The cruiser number painted on the door didn't match Malone's usual unit. This was Cruiser 17, which belonged to... My blood froze. Cruiser 17 belonged to Deputy Jenkins, who had gone missing a month ago while responding to a distress call. His disappearance had been attributed to an accident. His cruiser was eventually found submerged in Blackwater Lake, but his body was never recovered. Yet here was his cruiser, intact in the middle of nowhere. I backed away slowly, trying my radio again. Nothing but crackling static. As I retreated toward my own vehicle, a voice suddenly cut through the white noise of the radio inside Jenkins' cruiser. "This is Deputy Jenkins requesting backup. Officer down, I repeat, officer down." It was a recording. It had to be. Jenkins had been declared dead weeks ago. I ran back to my cruiser and tried again to raise dispatch, fighting rising panic. When I reached for the ignition, I realized something else was wrong. My keys were missing. I always left them in the ignition on remote calls like this. Always. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as a voice spoke from the darkness beyond my headlights. Rookies are so predictable. A figure stepped into the light. A man in his 40s wearing a flannel shirt and work pants. Nothing remarkable about him except for what hung from his belt. A collection of sheriff's department badges, glinting in the headlights. "You're the first to find my workshop," he said conversationally as if we were discussing the weather. Most head straight to the distress call, never even noticed the cellar. "Where's Deputy Malone?" I kept my voice steady, my hand on my weapon. The man chuckled. "Malone's fine. Probably asleep at home. That wasn't him on the radio." He tapped his throat and spoke again, but this time in a perfect imitation of Dispatch Ellen's tired drawl. "This is Raven County Dispatch. All units be advised." I drew my weapon. "On the ground, now." He smiled, unperturbed. "You should check your sidearm, Deputy Rogers." The weapon felt wrong in my hand, too light. When I glanced down, I saw why. The magazine was missing. "Took it while you were investigating the cellar," he explained. "You really should be more careful with your equipment." My mind raced, trying to piece it together. The missing men. Practice. He shrugged. Had to perfect the technique before moving on to more interesting targets. He gestured to the badges on his belt. "Like our friend Jenkins here, and the others." "Others?" 7 officers in 3 counties over the past 2 years. Always the night shift. Always the rookie or the loner. Always the ones who won't be missed right away. I lunged for my cruiser door, but he was faster, slamming me against the hood. Something sharp pressed against my ribs. A hunting knife, the blade catching the glow of the headlights. "Your department really should invest in better training," he whispered. "First rule they taught me in the academy. Always call in before investigating a scene." The academy? My mind reeled as he pressed the knife harder. "That's right, rookie. 15 years with the Vernon County Sheriff's Department before they forced me out. Said I was unstable, unfit for duty." His voice hardened. "They took my badge, so I started collecting new ones." I felt him reach for my badge with his free hand. In that moment of distraction, I slammed my elbow backward into his solar plexus. He doubled over, cursing, and I broke free, sprinting for the tree line. "I've hunted better prey than you," he shouted behind me, his voice echoing through the trees. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping my face. I could hear him pursuing, unnervingly calm, calling out as if we were playing a game. "Your department isn't even looking for you yet, Rogers. I disabled your radio when you found the cellar. As far as they know, you're still on regular patrol. By the time they realize you're missing, your badge will be on my belt, and your cruiser will be at the bottom of Blackwater Lake, just like the others." I needed to find the road, to flag down a passing car, to get to a house with a phone. But in the darkness, every direction looked the same. I'd left my flashlight in the cruiser and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. After what felt like hours of running, I stumbled into a small clearing and froze. Ahead of me loomed the silhouette of a house, if you could call it that. A decrepit hunting cabin, windows dark, porch sagging. I approached cautiously. The door hung half open on broken hinges. Inside, the beam of moonlight breaking through the clouds revealed what the cabin contained. A wall covered in newspaper clippings. Missing officer reports, department obituaries, police academy graduation photos with faces circled. And in the center of the wall, a large map of 3 counties with red pins marking locations along remote roads, each pin tagged with a badge number. The floor creaked behind me. "Welcome to my trophy room, Deputy Rogers." I spun around, grabbing the first thing I could find, a broken chair leg, and swung it with all my strength. There was a satisfying crack as it connected with his head, sending him stumbling backward. I pushed past him, back into the night. Dawn was breaking by the time I found the highway, a passing trucker spotting me staggering along the shoulder. By noon, the sheriff had assembled a task force. By sunset, they'd raided the cabin and the storm cellar. They found 5 deputies' badges nailed to the cabin wall like hunting trophies. In the cellar, they discovered the remains of the 3 missing men from my patrol route, along with 2 more officers from neighboring counties previously thought to have left their jobs or relocated. Ex-Deputy Thomas Grayson was arrested 3 days later trying to cross the state line. The media called him the badge collector. The trial revealed the full extent of his delusion. He believed he was cleansing the departments that had rejected him by eliminating what he called unworthy officers. I testified at his sentencing, watching his face as they gave him 7 consecutive life terms. He smiled at me from the defendant's table, that same conversational smile from the clearing. "You passed the test," he said as they led him away. Most of them failed. I left the Raven County Sheriff's Department the following month. Couldn't handle the night shift anymore. Couldn't drive those dark county roads without seeing headlights following me in the rearview mirror. These days, I work day security at the county courthouse. The hours are better. The lighting is better. Sometimes I see my old colleagues when they bring in suspects or testify at trials. They nod respectfully. The rookie who caught the badge collector. They don't know I still sleep with my service weapon within reach. They don't know I still wake up hearing that voice crackling over a dead man's radio. Because Thomas Grayson told me something during one of the trial recesses, something that wasn't recorded in any transcript. He leaned forward, those dead eyes fixed on mine, and whispered, "I trained a replacement, and he has your badge number memorized. I've been on day shifts ever since, but sooner or later, we all have to face the night.